Okay, so this little discussion then kind of ties into both courses, maybe more of the project. Situation is students are developing in SQL Server, how do we get our POCO classes? We said last term that you can, right, start with an existing database and still do code first. But exactly how do you get there? There's a few things to be aware of, right? So POCO with an existing database. POCO. All right. So doing code first, there's still two choices. We can do our model classes and generate the database. That's what we've done all term last year. But we can also take an existing database and have it generate all of our model classes. There's two approaches. I skipped that first one altogether because I don't want you to do it. When you first do this, it'll offer the chance to do any framework designer with an entity data model. So it creates this actual EDMX file. It graphically looks something like that. Right? And it's kind of a neat approach that anytime you change the database, you just right click and refresh your model from the database. But as you do so, it also deletes and recreates all your model classes. So if you put any of your own annotations in for display names or other regexes that you want or things like that, they get destroyed, right? You can use a separate metadata class so that if the model class gets deleted and replaced, your metadata can still stay in its own class. But in any case, we're going to skip that one altogether because we like code POCOs, right? Plain old CLR objects. So code from an existing database. Basically, when we follow the wizard and we select that option, it generates models. It's like a snapshot. The current status of our database design is reflected in the models that are created. But that's it, right? The question then becomes, what about design changes going forward? How do we handle that? And there's really three main choices, right? We could do another override of the classes. Okay, so you basically run the wizard again, and it will replace the current version of all the classes with a totally new version based on the new schema in the database. So you go into the database, alter table, whatever, do whatever you want there, and generate a new set of classes. Same issue we just were talking about though, that if you've done any customization in the classes with annotations and so on, unless you do that in a separate metadata class, they'll get lost, right? Obviously, the next choice is just do it manually, right? The point is you have a snapshot, but there's nothing in place to let you know or notify you if there's now a difference between the design of the database and your model classes. You manually have to synchronize your changes yourself. So if you add a new property in a model class, you have to go to the database and add that new field to correspond to it. As long as you do, you're okay. And vice versa, right? And you change the database, you've got to go and change the models. And that can work, but you can clearly see the danger. Right? It's pretty easy to make a mistake and get out of sync between the two. Or we can do what we love to do, migrations, right? Yes, we started off with a snapshot of the classes based on the database, but if we decide amongst the team of developers, say, okay, well, from now on going forward, we'll do code first. Any changes we make, we'll make in our classes, and we use migrations to keep the database in sync. Then that's maybe your best option, right? But you can decide. Maybe you want to do it manually. Maybe you like to shoot yourself in the foot too, right? Okay, so we'll enable code first migrations and make all further changes as we have been. All right. So when we enable migrations, there's two things that we can do in terms of how we're going to approach going forward in the future. So there's kind of two options. We can use the existing schema as the starting point for all further work going forward. So that's good if there's other copies of the database around. We've been given one to work with, right? But maybe it's even in production. It's being used right now, and there's data in it, and so on, right? And so that's what we'd want to do, is we want to start with the current schema and work forward, okay? The other option is to assume, well, we're going to have an empty database as a starting point, right? We'll take the current schema, but we're going to start with an empty one and work forward. If that's confusing, maybe my next comment will clear it up, okay? It comes down to this. You're going to generate a set of migrations. Do you want those migrations basically to start from the current state of the database? In that case, you want option one. If you wanted to start with an empty database and be able to recreate, first of all, everything that currently is there, and then subsequently all your migrations afterwards, then you'd want option two. Right? So there's no right or wrong, it's just which approach you want to implement. But just be aware of a couple things then, right? If we take that first approach, using the existing schema as a starting point, then all we do is, when we add, after we enable migrations, when we go to add the first migration, you do this option, dash ignore changes. So basically it will generate an empty migration. The up and the down will be empty, nothing in them, right? But what it does do for us is it makes an entry in the migrations history table with that snapshot. So it does take that snapshot and store it in the database of the current status of the model. So then you can just go forward, and any new migrations you make, you just start making them, add migrations, update database, and everything will stay in sync. The second approach, we just say add migration initial create like normal. And it'll have everything there, all the create tables and everything for the current design. But of course, if we tried to run that, all the tables are there already, right? It'll start reaching out from the screen and hitting us with a mouse stick or something, right? Because saying, you can't do this, you know. So there's a simple solution. Watch my little animation here in PowerPoint. It took me an hour to get this to work. Okay, you ready? Ooh. Temporarily comment all the code in the up. So we just comment everything out, all the actions that are there in the up. And then we update database, right? That puts the entry, okay, with the snapshot and everything, it convinces the system we've applied the migration, which is obviously how we have the database in the state that we have it, right? Now it's happy. Oh yes, I made that database. Really, it was already there, but he thinks he just made it. Afterwards, we uncomment it, so that next time you could start with a brand new empty database, apply your migrations, and it will take an empty database right through and up to your latest developments, right? So just two ways. It all depends on how you want to work it, okay? So just a couple things to be aware of. There are a couple little traps. You know, the default names may not match, so if the system generates, especially if you follow option 1 and then you actually drop and recreate a table or something, okay, it will use the standard naming conventions that we've seen and used all along. Could be the first time somebody created that table, they gave their own names for indexes and things like that, right? Well, you won't get those names back again automatically, so just be aware that could be a bit of a problem. And then the initial down method might fail, okay, if you've taken that option 2, right? If you actually try to roll back, I mean, why would you ever roll back to an empty database? But just be aware it could possibly fail, again, because default names may not match, okay? Another difference is the scaffolding will always add indexes for foreign keys. Every foreign key will be indexed, whereas the database might not have had that. So it's just a little thing to be aware of, but usually it's never a big problem, okay? So with that in mind, what we're going to do is we're going to start an example. We'll just go through, create a brand new empty project here. Bada bing, bada boom. There we go. Web. And we'll give it a name. I'll maybe call it NBD. Natural by design. Okay. MVC. Sure, we can give some authentication. And away we go. Alrighty. Okay, so here it is, just a brand spanking new empty project pretty much. So I'm going to come in here and we're going to add to the app data folder, of course, oh, it's not in the list yet, so I'll just have to say new item and data, SQL Server database. So I might as well call it NBD. NBD. And a couple things will happen here. Of course, it sees that I'll probably need a connection string and so on. Oh, I guess it says it's ready. Okay, so here's my NBD, right? Of course, it's empty. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just ask for a new query window. So here's where I can put a query. Well, guess what? Back in Blackboard, remember, I posted the all the code here. Control A, Control C. There's all the create tables and everything. hundreds and hundreds of lines of code. I'll execute it all. Bring query executed successfully. That's it. I'm done with the query window. No. This takes a little while. Okay. So if I do a quick refresh here, there we go. There's all of your familiar tables and with all the data in them and everything else. By the way, that's another aspect. If you go with the option 2, where you're starting from an empty database, there's no seed data, right? This way I have all the data that's populated in the table, and I don't have to worry about creating a bunch of stuff in the seed data. I mean, there's other ways you could get the data in as well, but you know, it's kind of easier in this case to just start with the existing database, right? Okay, so there it is, and that's all there is to it. Where are my classes, right? I haven't made those yet. So here is where, right, we just have the default ones that were there already. So the models folder is probably as good a place as any, because most of the classes are going to be generated will go in whatever folder I'm using here, and that's where I want them to be. So I will add another new item, okay, an ADO.NET entity data model, right? We select that first of all. I'll give it a typical name we've done for our DB context in the past, something like NBD entities. All right, now here's that EF designer from database. Don't want that. That gives you that EDMX file. Look at this. Code first from database. Yes, we just want our nice little POCO classes. Okay, thank you. So I'll select that. Data connection. So here's the connection string. Save it in the web config file. Oh, thank you, Mr. Wizard. Saves me putting it in there manually. And I'll just select all the tables. There's no views. And I'll click finish. Notice that it was great. I couldn't even unselect the option to have it generate the foreign keys, the integer ID foreign key values. That's good because we've seen how helpful they are, right? And there we go. So look at that. So there is our DB context class with all those DB sets, right? Here's all this Fluent API stuff for all the relationships. That's okay. Doesn't hurt. But look over in our models folder. We have all of our classes, okay, all generated nicely for us. So now, you know, they have some annotations, mainly the ones that are related to the database, so things like string length and so on and so forth. Some extra ones you might not have seen before, but that's okay. For like this ID is not a identity, so it's decorated, database generated, option none, because it doesn't, in this design, have an identity. You have to manually provide the ID numbers and things like that, right? And there's, you know, table. Doesn't hurt. Didn't need it, but, you know, it doesn't hurt having it there either, right? These system diagnostics ones, you could actually delete them, and it's not really going to make any difference. But, you know, basically, I wouldn't spend a lot of time modifying these models. I mean, you can, though. Right? If you're going to use migrations going forward, you can change your own annotations to your heart's content, add your display names and things like that. Away you go. But you see we have all of them here. Now, of course, our context is in here as well, which is not the way we normally organize things. So maybe I'll take a moment and we'll actually get migrations going. But it bugs me to have the context inside the models folder. It really should be inside a DAL folder. So if you give me a second, we'll just fix that up. So I'll just add a new folder called DAL, right? And I'm going to take my context, cut, and paste, okay? Now I'm going to have to fix a few things, because of course the namespaces, right? The namespace comes from the folder, so it thinks it's in the model folder, so I'll manually change that to the DAL. So now it knows it's in the DAL folder. Okay. Now, of course, it doesn't know about any of the classes. But I can pick any one of them, control period, and say using NDB models. There we go. So now my context knows about the models namespace and understands all the models, and away we go. And I should be done there except for one thing. I think if I do a build now, I should get a couple build errors maybe. Here we go. So inside identity config, okay, there's a confusion because, see that? Task is ambiguous between our models.task and system threading task, right? That's because there's a model in the actual design from the database, a table called task. So it's confused. I could fix this in a few ways, but there's other references down here to things that are in the models folder and so on and so forth. So, sometimes it's just as well to take the option, specify specifically that it's system.threading.tasks.task, right? There's only a couple of spots here where we have to add that. And that way, instead of getting confused about which namespace, I'm telling specifically, hey, Mr. Task, this is the one you are, right? And there we go. That should get rid of all my build errors. Build successful. Okay, so now we'd be ready to enable migrations, right? So I can start just modifying my classes instead. So I'll just come to the DAL folder. I'll make my folder for my NBD migrations, because I like to have them organized under the DAL folder. And that's it. So we'll just come to our package manager console. And we need to enable migrations. I hit tab, there we go. And of course we have to specify, because I have two contexts, right? The context type name is NDB entities. And then I want to specify my migrations directory is my DAL /NBD migrations. And let's hope I typed it right.
I think you put NDB at the first. I did that all last semester. Our file was called
NDB. Okay. Oh, no, that one was right. NDB, right? No, BD. By design.
I kept writing nature by design for some reason.
Yeah, it sounded nicer.
All right. So it looks like we're going ahead. There we go. There's my first configuration file. Of course, there's no seed data, right? Not surprising, but that's okay. Let's actually add a migration then. Now here is where I'm going to use that, not force, ignore, right? Ignore changes. Because I'm going to take the database as it is, because it has all that data in it, right? I'm going to go forward. So we'll ignore changes, and then I'll still call it initial create. And there we go. And now I can update database. Oh, notice the up and down are empty, right? Because we ignored changes, so we're saying, okay, this migration really isn't creating everything, it's already there, but I have to do an update database, so it stores the snapshot in the migrations history table. Update data, help me out, IntelliSense. Now I only have migrations enabled on one context, that's why I didn't have to worry about specifying context anymore. There we go. So it's done. So we actually have migrations. So what I can do now is I'll come down and pick something, anything, maybe a worker, right? So we have a first name and a last name. So maybe I'll add a new property, prop, tab, string, work, WRK, I don't know, nickname. Nick. Okay. And I need at least to put, I'm not going to make it required, but I do want to have a string length on it. I might as well steal that one. Okay, so now I've made a change to my model, so we know what's going to happen. Now I can add migration. Work nickname. Just to prove that migrations is working, right? And there we go. So there's our up, just adding the column. Our down would remove it again, so I can go forward and back through the migrations. I can update database. And there we go. So now the database itself should have that new field in it. That's talking about Azure up there, don't worry about that. So if I find my worker table, let's show table data. And there's the worker nickname, okay? It's all null, but that's okay, I allowed it to be null. All right, so we have a fully functioning set of migrations now, so we can just go forward, right? Doing the same kind of coding and development that we've done in the past. We should never have to regenerate those classes. They have them now, right? So we can feel free to go in, add our own annotations, you know, if we want to add some validation ones and so on and so forth, right? Because we don't plan on ever recreating them at this stage. We're just going to take them and go forward. Any changes are done in the code and then migrated back to the database. So that's how you can start with a database and still do your code first like you like. Any final questions? Bada bing.